Satisfied members that we have a quorum? Think so. Sharon, Councillor Sharon, are you online?
Yes, Bill, I am. Thank you.
And thank you so much for being online because you've made up our quorum. Councillors, I'll officially open the meeting with the acknowledgement of country. We wish to acknowledge the Ngadjuri and Kaurna people, the traditional owners of the land in which we meet today. We pay our respects to the elders past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are present today. Councillors in attendance, we have apologies from Councillor Mark Frankham, and Councillor Sam has contracted COVID and she may not be available even online. She's going to try, depending on how she feels. And of course, we've got Sharon online as well. But I have no other apologies at this point, but I think that our attendance numbers might change as the meeting progresses. We have no leave of absence and no, well, at this stage we do have some non-attendance, but I might wait before they get annotated into the minutes. At this particular meeting, we have a presentation tonight of the budget and long-term financial plan by our Dr. Nigel Graves, and we're certainly looking forward to that. As this is a milestone for our council, of course, in the budget process, and it'll be a good one for us to be able to get a head around tonight, not needing to discuss other matters and staying focused. So item 4 on our agenda is the recommendations from the committee. So we might move into that. And the first one is 4.1 is the Audit and Risk Committee meeting. And it's a recommendation at the top of the page that the agenda reports and minutes of the meeting of the Light Regional Council Audit and Risk Committee held Tuesday the 10th of May be received. Someone like to move that motion? Thanks, Councillor Simon, and someone second that. Councillor David, all those in favour? Those against, that's carried. Councillors, are there any matters you'd like to have withdrawn? There's a recommendation there from the Audit and Risk Committee. Councillor Dean?
We need to withdraw that because if we do that, that commits us to putting out the draft budget in its current form, and I don't think that's what we should do, personally. So we need to discuss it, I think, and we've got a presentation, I think, from Nigel that we need to look at before we make up our mind.
So you're moving to withdraw that matter?
I'm saying it should be withdrawn, yeah.
Sure. Someone like to second that?
But we don't need to. I've just withdrawn it.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll open up for discussion. I think you make a very valid point because this will more likely, the recommendation that comes out of this evening's meeting, no matter what it is, will need to go back to the Audit Committee anyway. It doesn't. Okay. So that, well, yeah, I would have thought they did, but there you are. They don't have to.
Through the chair, it's recommendation has been put to council by the Audit and Risk Committee, and now it's a council decision regarding draft budget that goes out for public.
Right. Well, I'm just trying to address this matter though. Then that Councillor Dean has withdrawn this matter to discuss that the general rate revenue increase of 6.7%. Having a meeting within a meeting, are we? I've got one meeting going on out there, another one going on here. I don't know where I am. But this matter here has been withdrawn as part of the agenda matter. Oh, okay. Yeah, point of order, councillors. I think we need to go back to section 3 of our council agenda tonight before we move on to the recommendations from committees.
Or the deputation, yeah.
I think that makes sense, and that will address this particular matter as well. Yeah, thanks, June. My mistake, councillors. So we move back to section 3 on our agendas, which is the deputation and presentations. And we have a presentation from Dr. Nigel Graves, our finance manager. And there's a couple of handouts to go to complement that as well, councillors. So I'll pass over to you, Nigel, and thank you.
Thanks, Mayor Bill. So, agenda for what I'm going to talk about, I'm going to just revisit some key dates about this budget, long-term financial plan, business plan process. We'll talk about briefly the Audit Risk Committee recommendation. This is a reminder.
Councillors, I'm just going to have to suspend the meeting for a moment while we get Councillor Sharon back online. Otherwise, we don't have a quorum.
Oh, I can see you guys.
Oh, well, I've been...
Yeah, I'm on board too, Bill.
And feels close.
Oh, okay. Thanks, councillors. We're back in meeting mode. And Councillor Close is online, also councillors. Good evening, Bill. Councillor,
Thanks, Mayor Bill.
your timing is impeccable.
I've been trying for a while.
Thanks, Nigel.
I will talk briefly about the Local Government Act reforms regarding business planning, just as a reminder. We'll go through some business plan highlights quickly. This was raised by the Audit Risk Committee that they believe that the highlights should be included in the document, so we've compiled those to be included. Just a bit of an overview of the budget process as it stands, and I'll talk about some of the key changes to the financial statements or budgeted financial statements. Many of you have probably seen all of these highlights before in other forums, so it's probably not a surprise, but it's probably best I revisit those. I'll talk about what I'm describing as the underlying budget surplus through that. We'll briefly talk about what's required for public consultation. I'll then move into talking about various aspects of the property valuation increases and rating levels, and suggesting possible other scenarios for your consideration, and also talk about the possibility of allowing a rebate for relief from extraordinary substantial increases in property rates. And then we'll get to some draft resolutions. So tonight's the special council meeting to approve for public consultation the annual business plan and long-term financial plan. You're required under the Act to provide notice, website and in the paper, and allow people 21 days to consider the draft and either make written submissions or attend a future meeting. We're proposing that the special council meeting now be held on the 14th of June to receive public submissions and answer questions, and that's the meeting where you have to allow at least an hour for those submissions and questions. And then finally, we're saying that the budget should be adopted and rates declared, etc., on the 28th of June for the next financial year. This was in the meeting agenda. It's the recommendation that's already been referred to from the Audit and Risk Committee, and it was that the notations regarding the significant increase in rate revenue, and especially affecting the residential rates, that was 9.9% at that time, but it's actually increased a little bit since then. Local Government Act reform. So you're now required to adopt the business plan by the 15th of August. We prefer that it not be that late. And previously it was the 31st of August. Another change is that if after the consultation process you listen to people's submissions and you make significant changes to what was a draft. What you're required to do is prepare a special statement in that in the revised final business plan that explains why you made changes to the original draft. You don't need to go back to public consultation, so you can accept some people's submissions or not. The other interesting change is that you include the total amount of borrowing in the plan, and effectively you can only borrow during the year up to the total amount that you specified. So you got to pre-warn people about borrowing. I suppose what's interesting in terms of this current plan is we're not actually proposing any new borrowing, because any borrowings related to the next financial year the council's already endorsed. So in terms of changes at this stage, that's zero. But the other thing is rates instalment dates must be adjusted if the rate is declared after the 15th of August. Well, it seems to be being non-compliant with the Act if you do that, but I suppose they had to include, well, then you better adjust the instalment dates. The other interesting discussion is about this new general rate statement. And as simply as I can describe it is that if you refer to growth in rate revenue in your plan, that any discussion of growth can only relate to new properties, new assessments. You can't describe increases in property valuation purely because the prices have gone up. You can't describe that as growth. You can describe that as the reason what's happened, that they've been revalued. What it was actually a group of the South Australian Local Government Finance Managers Group and the Local Government Association got together and developed this template. And the template's in the draft. We'd obviously have to change the template numbers if the situation changes tonight in terms of rates. But the idea of that template is that everybody across local government is showing things exactly the same, and it's clear. That's the reforms. The next slide was just a graphical overview of the journey in developing the long-term financial plan, budget and annual business plan. What it's intended to show is that it is the expenditure plans, other revenue plans, that is the driving force behind the development of the budget. To start with, you get down after a number of processes to developing a revised budget, being that blue box, which is where we're at the moment with a draft of those various documents. Once you have considered that document, you then move to, well, how do you share the rate revenue requirement amongst ratepayers? Just as part of that process, you do initially do estimates of what the rate revenue is going to be, and that comes from various aspects. Looking at the long-term financial plan forecast for the year from the previous process, looking at what you think might be the valuation increase. But when we started on this journey, we had very little idea that the valuation increases that we were going to receive when we received them in April were going to be anything like what has happened. So there was a little bit of a surprise along the way. And obviously in that process, there's some public consultation that has to happen before this is finalised and budget approved and rates declared. I won't go through them all, but maybe you can do that at your leisure. But these are the highlights we've selected thus far. Sorry, the second to bottom one on the right, I've still got COVIS. I don't think that's a new virus. I think that's the current COVID one, but there's a small provision in there in case something needs to happen. I suppose one of the biggest numbers there is the repaying of the borrowing on the bottom for the Bunyip 2. So that has a significant impact.
Excuse me, Nigel, just a quick question. Are we going to get a handout of this tonight's presentation to members?
I will email it to you in a PDF like I've done previously.
That's fine. But for some of these, it'd be very interesting for us to have a really good look at in our own time.
And at some point, we'll be preparing members with a summary of what's happening, with talking points about the key aspects of the budget. So that'll be also a resource that you can use. So this is where you might like to look at the sheet. Sorry for those who are online, but the sheet that you've got is to possibly avoid having to look at small numbers on the screen. I think most of you have probably seen some of these key changes, but I tried to highlight them in yellow. The ones I should talk about is that note that there was that separate rate for the water scheme over recent years of 1.8 million per year. We're expecting that with the payout of the water scheme that will be reduced. At this stage, the budget's assuming that it'll occur at a 3-month point, but just beware that I suspect we're probably going to have to, when we declare the rate for 1.8 million, and then when the Bunyip 1 is paid out, you'll probably be asked to provide a rebate proportionate to the time that the scheme has been paid out. So it could be for 9 or 10 months. The next major item there is 4.843 million for what's expected for the Bunyip 2 in terms of grants and contributions. That's obviously having a big impact on revenue, and further down the advances being made next financial year of 8.66 million. The overall impact of Bunyip on the operating, the Bunyip 2 on the operating is a deficit of just over $3.6 million, and that's why I've made an adjustment to the way it's presented to show that the net impact of Bunyip 2 and the underlying, there's an underlying surplus, a small surplus of about 156,000. The other thing worth highlighting, I put a red star up the top there to say that even with the forecast revenue that's currently in the draft annual business plan, and with those significant increases in valuation, it still fell short of the long-term financial plan for that year, and that's because of the significant reduction in primary production rates in this year to relief for the big increase in property valuations, but that wasn't allowed for in the 22-23 financial year. So I was assumed that revenue was still going to come in. So that's why even with those significant valuation increases, the revenue isn't more. Hopefully all that makes sense. Then just a summary of the capital works program. Main thing to highlight there, I've some bold lines I've got towards the bottom showing what the total capital works that's been approved and endorsed by council from the infrastructure committee is over the next 4 years. Second to bottom number there, average gross capital works over the 4-year period, just a little bit under 7 million a year. I think that's probably important to understand because again, these numbers are probably pretty hard to see. I don't expect you to look at the individual numbers, but all those lines of the top box are is the forecast depreciation on all assets, including any new assets that we're building along the way. And the numbers to focus on is right over there on the far right-hand side is the average column. So the average depreciation, which is supposed to represent the wear and tear and consumption of all of your assets, is 7.1 million per year over that 10-year period. If you look down a little bit further, the next average is what's being spent or proposed to be spent in accordance with your asset management plan over those 10-year period. And it's just a little bit over 8 million. So about 900,000 per year than depreciation. And the reason for that is that it is still somewhat in catch-up mode with that plan being developed the previous year. So there's been a number of years when expenditure on assets is probably less than probably what it should be. So the next 10 years that you would have caught it all up. So it'd be a good time to be around in 10 years' time. I believe that that's a good indication of the sustainability of the plan, and sustainability was referred to by the Audit and Risk Committee. This one you have to look at, I think, on the sheet. It's too hard to see online. The key numbers are that the first one at the top is to do with how much cash we have. At the moment, we don't tend to keep cash. We use any spare cash to pay down our borrowings. And out there in the 25, 26 year, we start having some cash. The reason for that is directly related to the payout of the $22 million from Bunyip 1, and then we pay down the loan, and anything above the 11.3 direct loans, we then pay off cash advance debentures either by relinquishing them or just reducing them. The financial assets currently in that 21-22 year, just a little bit under 22 million, and most of that is receivables. The vast majority, 21.528 million, is a receivable related to Bunyip 1, and there's a few $100,000 in there related to community, mainly sporting bodies and the like, with small loans that they progressively pay us over the years. So what happens is that when the 22 million comes in, virtually all of that receivable is written off. Then in the next financial year, and I'm assuming that happens on 1 July, but it might happen slightly before then, but I'm assuming 1 July, then we will create a new receivable of $11 million related to Bunyip 2. So it comes down by 22 million and goes up by 11 million. Then if you go out in future years, the year that it drops off to only a few $1,000s, that's the year that the agreements will expect the $11 million will be paid out on Bunyip 2. So after that, it'll only be a few small community loans. A little bit further down, other non-current assets, currently 6.2 million. That's in that other non-current assets was the holding of the original construction cost of the farm. So this financial year, not next year, this financial year will revalue that and bring that into the property assets aspect. I'm guessing it's going to be revalued at a lot more than 6 million. And therefore that significantly reduces that other non-current asset balance. We probably need to revise that line because it's the same number right throughout the plan. What that line, the 1.2 million, actually represents is an estimate of how much work in progress will be happening at the end of the financial year. So there's roads out there that aren't quite complete, for instance. That changes substantially. So it's very difficult to predict. It often depends on the weather and the like. Now I'm down to cash advance debentures under non-current liabilities. Currently 22 million, and you see the 11.3 million is paid off. Immediately the 22 million arrives for Bunyip 1, and then we use any surplus cash to reduce other cash advance debentures, and eventually that reduces very quickly to zero. And you'll note as a consequence of that, interest paid falls very sharply. Then finally, the line other non-current liabilities. When you create that liability of 11 million, the other side, in terms of Bunyip 2, the other side of the accounting entry is a deferred income. So we create that as well. So it actually balances up nicely. So the year out where the 11 million is repaid by Bunyip 2, the 11 million will then be transferred out of that liability. And in that year, the organisation will make a substantial surplus as a consequence of that, because it's going to have a very large revenue number. The last line is reserves, and that's reduced as a consequence of the proposal to do the CWMS major project. Public consultation, just an overview again of that. So you have a choice in terms of public consultation. You can have a formal public meeting, or you can have an ordinary council meeting, which is set aside at least 1 hour for people to ask questions about the budget and make submissions. And people have to be given 21 days from the date stated in the notice to make their written submissions. Regarding public consultation, I put up one of my favourite quotes from Henry Ford, who said, "If I asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses." So maybe it might have been better if we stuck with the horses, but anyway. But I suspect when you ask people, they want a lot more of what they're already getting. I think that's the meaning. So that's the budget highlight components of the presentation. And now we move into what's happening with property valuation and rates. First slide is just an overview of what's happening with rateable assessments. So overall, you've got a 7.2% increase in the total valuation. That includes both new properties and existing properties being revalued. And then you've got a list of all the changes in the number of assessments. There's a little bit of oddity regarding one towards the bottom, which is vacant land. You can see that vacant land, there's actually 29 less assessments. So there's some movement happening there. Some of those have moved from vacant land into residential because they've had houses built on them. But we suspect that there's probably quite a few other allotments that are going to come on stream probably next financial year now. I also suspect that because of the number of vacant allotments that appear to be transferred to residential, that there's still some outstanding valuations that are going to come through this year where they haven't actually valued new houses on properties, but that may occur over the next few weeks. So that might result in some additional revenue. But obviously the biggest change there is the number of assessments is on residential. So one of your obligations under the Act is to consider whether you need to assist people with providing relief regarding rapid, significant increases in property valuations. And it's something that at the end of the presentation, I think you should discuss. And that is what you're seeing here, is that considered rapid? Well, one thing to keep in mind is that the 12.7% increase in the residential property valuation, that's just the average. So there are valuations far, far higher than that, and there's others that have hardly moved at all. So there's a very wide spectrum of change. You do have this sheet, and some of you have seen it before at the rating workshops. It's a few weeks old now, but it's to highlight that you've got a large variation right across the region in terms of the valuation increases. The largest average, so again, it's average, and there's a lot higher than the average and also lower. So Freeling, Kapunda, Greenock, 13, and 14%, but other areas haven't quite got the same sort of increases. Gawler Belt was interesting. It's only 6.9% on average, but maybe the average there is disguising what's happening with residential property around there as well. So just a reminder, the current rate structure, this is the differential rate structure. So first of all, an $875 minimum rate, residential rate, primary production currently at 75% of residential. Prior to this year, it was 81%. Commercial 175, commercial other 200, and industrial 275. Again, at the rating policy workshops, we did have a bit of a look. I thought of these comparisons with other councils. I thought it'd be worth just putting up again because of and I've coloured them yellow, highlighted them yellow, because you can see the widely varying ways that primary production differential rates are treated in councils of similar size and location and around South Australia. So the lowest one there is the Clare and Gilbert Valley. Their differential for primary production is 57% of the residential, yet their residential is exceptionally high. So it's 50.51. So that's a fairly high rate just for residential property. Quite a number of them, the primary production is 100%, same as the residential. Mount Barker's 84. Again, the other end is that they've got a relatively low residential rate, so you need to take that in consideration. So I suppose many more, much bigger population, many more rateable properties in a place like that. So in that sense, overall light is relatively low. This slide with the chart is supposed to show just the residential and the primary production comparison, and just to give you a picture of where light sort of fits in the scheme of things. I suppose if you were a lot lower than other councils, you'd say, well, maybe we're not raising enough revenue. And if you're a lot higher, you'd probably say, well, what's happening there? But so the dark blue in the middle is light for residential, and the yellow is the primary production. So that's how much rates would be paid for the average residential property and the average primary production property based on the rate in the dollars here and in those other councils. So then you've got the dotted black line, and the lower one is the point of comparison of where light is. So you can see that there's probably only one that's really less than here for residential, and that's Mount Barker, and others would be more expensive. And on primary production, it's pretty much the same as Adelaide Hills, but the only one that's less, which I spoke about before, is Clare and Gilbert Valley, but obviously their residential is paying some more revenue there. And if you look over there on the average, the far right, slightly less than average for residential, and certainly less than average for primary production across all of those comparisons. And I'd put a question mark here as a possible rate structure. And this is something at the end of the presentation, I suspect you probably want to debate because of what's happening with that significant increase in revenue. It's probably worth considering whether the rate in the dollar should be changed across the board, and also whether primary production should continue to receive that 75% ratio compared to the significant reduction that happened this year. And this is probably one of the key slides. The top box is what's happening with the valuation of assessments, and the key number I suppose to focus on is the value of the total valuation, but mainly that rateable property valuation, which on average has gone up 7.2%, which is quite a significant shift. Then the bottom box has two scenarios to it. So the first three lines is the scenario that's, as the note says, is in the current draft business plan, currently sitting around about the 6.7% increase in general rate revenue. What we're showing you for discussion is another alternative proposal, and that is to go back to the sort of business assumptions that we had approved when we started this journey of around about 2% for real growth. I shouldn't say real growth, I should say new property growth, and also an inflation factor. Well, back then we were talking about an expectation of something like 2.5%. The whole world has changed since that 2.5%. We might get away with that for one financial year, especially because of locked-in enterprise agreements, but the expectation is that in future years, especially the next financial year, that inflation will probably escalate. If you were to go for the second scenario of around the 4.6% increase, we need to find about $350,000 to keep that budget sustainable. What this next slide shows you is the rate in the dollar changes to get to that 4.6%, and also the adjustment to primary production. So you're looking at about a 3% reduction in the rate in the dollar across the board, but a 0.5% reduction in the primary production rate. The next, the bottom table gives you some information about what was the increases in the last financial year. So residential, for instance, the average rate paid increased by 1.6% for residential, and then look at the next comparison. You'll see that even if we reduce the rate in the dollar, you're still looking at a 6.6% increase in the average rate bill. So that's why we're suggesting that maybe it's time to consider some relief in terms of a rebate, especially for residential. The other big land use is primary production. You can see that last year the average primary production went up 0.16%, and even under the adjusted suggestion of a rate in the dollar for primary production at 77% of residential, that category would only have a 1.69% increase. Picked up the wrong slide. I'll go back to it. I think that this is the presentation before the last slide. No, it won't let me go back. Yes, it will. Karen had done a better one than this for me, but I'm going to have to stick with this one. So all this is a chart of all of the increases, just increases, not value of rates, it's just the percentage increases. So what you see there is that there's some that are reductions, so they're less than 0%. So the increase is on the left-hand side. And you can see that there's quite a few valuations that gradually increase up to around about 10%. And then there's a bit of a jump. And then, so over 10%, you've got a very large number that are around the 12, 13. It's actually an average of something like 15%. But then there is quite a lot of properties around the 30s, 34s, and 40%. And so you would expect that they would probably argue that some relief would be justified. I've looked at some of the valuations. I suppose they're consistent with what's probably happening in metropolitan Adelaide to some extent, that being driven by prices, but they're not houses being built on them. It's their values that are going from 420 up to 520, and it's quite clearly a valuation change and not an improvement, and there is a lot of them. So, how can you provide some relief? Well, there's a couple of sections in the Act. One section 154, which enables you to do whatever to provide relief, but 154 only applies to principal place of residence, so it doesn't apply to non-residential. 166 though enables you to do a rebate for rapid changes in valuation. A rebate can apply to all land uses, so not just residential. Can be on any conditions that you think fit, which is pretty wide power. They only apply in the year of rate declaration, so whatever happens next year will be interesting, because those that have had a 34% increase provide relief to them, then some way they may need relief again. Even if they have a small increase the following year, their rates bill will go up significantly compared to what is currently happening. What sort of conditions might you consider for a rebate? First of all, have some form of threshold. So at what point do you say, well, everybody over that level? If you think back on that graph, it was that sort of 11% sort of area where it flattened and then started to increase quite substantially. So it's probably around that point you'd certainly be thinking about providing those with relief. Apply to all land use categories, and I'll provide a note to this, but is the rebate automatically applied, or do ratepayers have to make an application? We need to say that we're in the process of systems change, and the current supplier has been told that when we get the new system going this year, that they're no longer, so they're probably not our best friends. So to make modifications would be quite difficult to do it probably automatically. So that and some other reasons that possibly an application is required, but keep in mind that you cannot have onerous rules on how to make an application, because that's contrary to the Act. So you can't make it really difficult for people. So we'd have to make it as easy as possible. So provide them with multi ways of applying, for instance. Do you give the rebate to anybody whose increase has happened because the land has been developed? So if it was vacant land last year and they got a new house this year, do you give that a rebate? Because they're going to have a substantial increase in their rates bill. Probably not. Probably not is the place to go. If someone has sold the property since the last year's rates, they don't know what last year's rates theoretically are, so they're not experiencing an increase. They're getting this year's rates. And I would have thought when they bought the property in the current year, they knew exactly what they were going to be in for, because they would have seen the settlement notice. Has the land use changed, especially if it went from something like primary production to residential? You would see a huge increase in the valuation simply because the land use change. I don't know whether they've had much of that this year, but I suspect there is some. And would you set a minimum amount of rebate? You don't want to be saying to people, "Yeah, you're going to get a rebate," and it's so small that it just looks trivial, so it's only $1. But if you said, well, let's make it $50 as a minimum to make it worthwhile for people to apply, the problem with doing that is that you might have two neighbours, and one gets $50 and the next door neighbours only works out to $49.50, and they're talking over the fence, and I got a rebate. I didn't. So that might not be the way to go. Possibly the smaller rebates might, if it's only $1 or something, people just won't bother. So we probably need to communicate to people what it would actually be worth. And there I just made a note about what the primary production rate in the dollar was with the when the 81% was reduced to 75% this year. So some potential conditions: 10% rebate applies to all land use, would be the easiest thing to administer, possibly the fairest, because there will be others. I note there is some reasonable growth in primary production, so some of those might have increased quite significantly. So a rebate would assist in that regard. We don't try to automatically apply it unless we come up with a software miracle. It's not available for land that's been physically approved, and we probably want to set a threshold valuation on that, so that we're at a threshold value, so that we're not picking up just minor things and excluding people because they put a fence up or something. Rebate not available for land that's sold, not available for land use that's changed, and we don't set a minimum rate but make it subject to application. So what would all that cost? On the left-hand side, if you made it 11% cap, it'd reduce revenue by about 200,000, 10%, 240, etc. So that seems to be about $40,000 per percent. And you went all the way down to 5%, which ends up being something like 90% of our ratepayers, 91.5%. So it's virtually every ratepayer will be over the 5% on average. So yes, the lower you go, but there's some justification for it being around that sort of 10% based on what happens after that 10-11% area. In terms of how would we pay for it to compensate, you could lift the minimum rate a bit. Hasn't been up for a few years. It doesn't really make a lot of difference to your revenue because it's not substantial enough. You couldn't go much higher than that because you'd receive a lot of negative feedback, I would expect. But a 5% increase is sort of the inflation norm now, and that's only $25,000. You could tweak up the residential rate a little bit, and that would then actually increase the number of people who would be on rebates. So there'd be a compensatory factor. The other thing to consider at the moment is that I suspect that there's new property still to come before we actually declare the rates, and after the consultation process. That always happens. It could be a reasonably significant amount based on what's happening this year. So it allows you to probably not make too big a decision on that at this stage. So there's a couple of resolutions. I'm just saying these as options. The key difference which I'm suggesting to you is that in terms of the rebate, it's not a decision you're making now. That's a decision you formally make when you declare the rates. The decision you make now is if you're interested in doing this, that you put that out for public consultation. So we include that in the consultation document. We say, look, these are going to be the rules, and therefore you're seeking people's input and comments on the rules. So that will give you something else to consider at the next meeting. I've conservatively suggested 11% being the threshold, and the others, as I've just outlined in the suggestions. So, what I'm suggesting is turning it off. What I'm suggesting is just think about this for now in terms of debate, but when you get to the resolution part, in terms of sequence, you need to consider these slides. So the top 3 lines are effectively the recommendation from the Audit Risk Committee. If you don't want to do rebates, if you just want to take the draft plan out exactly as it is, then it's a simple resolution. Just approve the budget, the business plan, and the financial plan for public consultation, and then we move forward. However, if you do want to consider the changes in terms of the rate in a dollar, in terms of the amount of general rates, you need to be a little bit more specific. So I'm saying, yes, approve the plan, but it's adjusted draft plan. We'll reduce the revenue by about $300,000 from rates to compensate for the reductions that are going to occur. A change in the differential rates to be reduced by 3%. You also need to take into consider what's going to happen with other land uses, but this is the residential differential rate. Minimum rate, I just said $900, which is a 2.5% increase, which would be consistent with what the original business assumptions are. And we need to find some savings on the operating expenditure side. I'm saying at about $200,000 on this suggestion, we could probably find that with savings within the budget or budget reviews. So I wouldn't be suggesting any changes to the budget program, expenditure programs at the moment. So this is, I suppose, a relatively easy solution. And there, Bill, that's me. Thank you.
Thank you, Nigel. Well, I was just going to put to the meeting whether we maybe suspend standing orders so we can ask questions freely and provide answers freely before we get into a more formal sort of resolution stage. Would that be applicable? Thanks, David. Thank you, Councillor Dean. All those in favour? That's carried. So we've just asked questions now, perhaps.
Yes, I have a question for
Councillor.
Nigel. At what rate does the 900 minimum rate come into? What's the value of the land? You know, when does that 900 come in? Do you know what I mean?
So it's currently 192,000. So with that rate in a dollar, it's probably going to be about 205, roughly.
That's when the minimum rate at 205,000.
Roughly.
Yeah, that's all right. Thank you.
Councillor Dean?
For you, Mayor Bill, Councillor David and I have received phone calls from residents concerning the hard waste collection and that's actually highly valued by our community. But the complaint is that there are a few people who have been unable to access it because every time they phoned, it's been booked out. And that's people who say instead of phoning within a few days of the announcement, might phone 2 or 3 weeks after the announcement. One lady that I spoke to has tried on 3 occasions and didn't find out about it soon enough. So, and don't know whether you want to talk about the ones that you received, Councillor David, but in discussions and some investigation, it seems like my original thought was that we increased that by 50%, but that it actually works out pretty pricey, like about an extra $22 in the waste charge. But I think that we should consider increasing the waste collection some amount, and maybe I suggest 25 or 20% to see what that effect has, and then if that's not enough, we can gradually increase it. But it seems to me that comment I've heard from around the traps, either we've got it and some other councils don't have it, that people feel fairly privileged because they've got that and it's highly valued. So, but it needs to be set at a level whereby people actually who want it can access it, not feel they've been shortchanged. So if it's a bit low now, we ought to think about putting it up a bit. And my question is, if we were to do that, does that need to be done to go out to public consultation? Because is that charge is part of the consultation on I believe, and therefore we need to flag that we're increasing the hard waste pickup numbers, and that will increase the total charge bit.
I think that does have to go in public consultation, and it's a cost neutral service that we provide. What
That's right.
income
So in other
comes
words,
in
yes, in
must
other words,
be
if
spent on that.
we provide it, we've got to collect more for it because it's
That's right.
cost neutral. In other words, all the money we collect has got to be spent on that, and if we haven't collected enough, we can't provide it.
Exactly.
Through the chair, the hard waste signage goes up at the end of the streets, and people have been really happy in Freeling because nobody is missing out. And if they ring up and Solo don't charge us anything for that, do they?
No.
No, that's free. So what?
Actually, it's not free. We pay for it.
How do we pay for it?
We pay Solo. In fact, the figures I've got is we pay Solo $200,000 a year for the current number of hard waste pickups.
Oh, I didn't
But
know
that's
that.
actually not free.
Yeah.
It's actually included in the charge.
Yeah.
So we set the charge so that it not only covers the 3 bin pickup, but also covers a certain number of hard waste pickups, and I think some vouchers for dump as well. And so therefore, if we have people who are saying that they have been unable to access it, we need to think about whether we actually have enough of them.
Councillor
So
Dean,
even if we do an incremental pickup, an increase of say 10%, it might be worth considering, and that would be probably around about a $7 increase.
I think if people do miss out on the hard waste pickup itself, there are vouchers available through Richard's office, and the people have to take
That's
it down
correct,
themselves.
but the people that I spoke to were unable to
Yeah, but that's the
use those
alternative.
vouchers because of their circumstances.
But it is available.
So, Councillor
people need.
David.
Yep. What Dean said is exactly correct from my phone calls. I've had 5 phone calls from people who rang up within a few days of the sign going up at the top of on the run there and being told, sorry, you've missed out for the 2nd or 3rd time because it's booked out. Now, there's 2 or 3 people, older people, haven't got a car, haven't got a trailer, so giving them a voucher, you might as well give them an ashtray and a motorbike because there's no use to them, you know. They're saying they need a hard pickup. Now, like Dean's saying, for an extra $20 per year, we could probably then manage 1 or 2 more pickups per year. I think there's a big benefit for the whole area, less dumping out on bush roads where then the action team are going to go out there and clean it up and what have you. I think it'd be a very good move if we did this, Dean.
Couldn't agree more.
Thanks. Can I just add another point? That is that I think in the light of the fact that we don't really know how much demand is exceeds supply, that it might be an idea to increase that a smaller amount initially and see what that does. And if we still get complaints, increase a bit more. So maybe an increase of 10 or 15% in the first year, which would not add a great deal to the overall charge. And I'll just, the other question is, if we're going to do that, we'd probably need a motion without notice to include that in the resolution, because that's a change from the annual business plan.
Yeah, we haven't adopted the business plan yet, though.
It needs to be in there to go up for consultation, though.
But we haven't adopted the version it's going out.
I know, but what I'm saying is it needs to be added to that.
Oh, that's right.
resolution. Sorry.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
But we can't, we could just add it to the resolution and,
That's
and
right.
give an amendment or all.
Yep. That's fine. Councillor Peter?
A topic I'm concerned about is that of public consultation. And I think it's a two-pronged matter. Firstly, that our ratepayers need to have more information. And I'm talking history, having been on the council for a number of years, and then publication somehow of the fact that we're going to have public consultation. Now, whether we have it in the chamber here or whether, for instance, we have public consultation in the Kapunda Institute, I don't know, but I think we can do better than we have been doing. And so that's something I raise and leave open to consideration. The other thing is, I look at this plethora of figures, and yes, I see the scholarship in them, but in my mind, I'll just put a very simplistic idea. That is that if we took every single rate assessment for every rateable property and we added, for instance, 2.5% to it, this would give us an across the board increase to match CPI. And I don't think it'd be administratively very difficult to do today. But it's just a thought. And I know what's been talked about in a much more complicated way tonight, but that's one of my considerations that I've made.
Thank you, Councillor Peter. Any further comments in relation to that, Councillor?
Just a question in relation to Councillor Peter's suggestion. I believe that the Act requires us to use valuations. Currently, we use the valuations provided by the Valuer General. Can't quite see how doing what Councillor Peter suggested can be done using valuations. Would you like to comment on that, Nigel? Is that have I got that wrong or right, or do we just dispense with Valuer General valuation and just choose our own arbitrary ones, which is really adding 2.5% is doing?
No, you're exactly correct that you can't just add a percentage to the existing valuations or existing calculations of rates. And even apart from that, the impediment you'd have is that how would you deal with all the new properties? How would you deal with any of the new properties because they don't have an existing? So the idea of the valuation and rating method is every year that it enables you to decide how are you going to share out the revenue required by the organisation to deliver the services you are going to deliver.
Nigel, I think Councillor Bill has a question online. Councillor Bill?
Thanks, Mayor Bill. Yeah, I like the second resolution that Nigel put up. I was a bit scared when the initial one had a 6.7% increase. So to bring it back to 4.6 is far more realistically. Does that the question of the rebate, does that have to be included, or is that a secondary resolution, or does that not have to go to a resolution? The fact of that, if we are going to put a query about the rebates in, does that need to be a resolution now, or is that where does that sit? That's my question.
Might leave that to Nigel.
Councillor, my expectation of the scheme of things was that you pass the first resolution, and then you would move to considering the rebate resolution. I suppose it'd be possible to add both together and consider them at the same time. While I'm talking on the screen now, you've got an addition to that resolution to allow for the potential for hard waste. So it's effectively a amendment to revenue and expenditure that doesn't have an impact on the bottom line.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Bill. I hope that answers that question. That's what the recommendations back up on the screen so that we know what we're all talking about.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. But I'm prepared to move that alternative resolution with the suggestion about the hard waste.
Right.
Mayor Bill, I'm happy to second that. I was quite concerned about the 6.7% because it deviated quite considerably from the long-term financial plan, I think, even though those numbers didn't look so different because of the fact the long-term plan didn't allow for the fact that we were continuing the additional discount for primary production. But this one is reasonable in that if you take out the growth, you've got an increase which is likely to be considerably less than inflation in this coming year. So in terms of real expenditure, that's actually, we're squeezing ourselves a bit to achieve that, I think. So I'm happy to second that motion that Councillor Bill put.
Thank you, Councillor Dean. Councillor David.
Just on that minimum rate, this is to Nigel, what would happen if we put that up 10% on that minimum figure instead of the 5% that you suggested? 2.5% was, I thought it was 5%.
In the resolution, 100, 120 was 5%, 100.
Right, okay. But what I'm getting at is if we put the minimum up to $1,000 per annum, which I think reflects a lot of what other councils will be going with, how does that affect our bottom line with then reducing that 4.6 to maybe just over 4 or thereabouts?
No, I don't think we'd change that because there's not enough of them.
I'm trying to do some quick arithmetic in my head. The brain's shutting down. Sorry, how much you talking about? $1,000. So you're going up $100.
Yep.
So
how many allotments we got currently?
Through the chair, so the suggestion was originally 5% increase in minimum rate, which was a yield of 25,000. So double that would be 50
grand.
Yeah.
Mayor Bill, I think the reason why, correct me wrong, Nigel, you suggested 2.5% is that is in line with what the pretty close to what the average rate increase for existing assessments is going to be. Is that correct?
Exactly right.
So if we make it more than that, then we are sorry, on a minimum rate, a more of a penalty than the others, even though they've actually had 2 years which haven't gone up at all. So I suppose in a way you can make an argument for that, but I think with this existing one as it is, we've given ourselves a bit of a challenge in saving some money, and we've come up with an increase which is about as fair as it can be to all concerned, particularly if we go down the rebate route.
Any further questions
Yes,
or comments?
I have one. At one of our other workshops, you gave us some figures. If everybody's rate was the same, what would the saving be? And I didn't write it down that night. And you gave us a figure that there would be a big saving, and I didn't write it down. And I was looking for it last night and I couldn't find it. Sorry, your brain's gone.
They might take one notice and we'll talk about that at the next rating workshop.
Yeah, all right. Yeah. I just thought I wanted to know what that figure was, because you said that when you did the figures that we would have an increased saving or a saving if it went right across the board. But anyhow, I'll just leave that to you, okay?
We have a mover and a second if the motion is up on the screen, or the resolution is up on the screen, Councillor.
I still have some questions. So either resolution that we pick, we're going to approve the draft annual business plan, long-term financial plan for public consultation. Is that correct? So therefore, I mean, I do have a fair few questions still about the plan itself, independent of the rating structure or all that. And I just wonder if I can
Certainly,
indulge.
If we could perhaps get the rating structure completed first, then we're going into the business plan itself. Would that be okay with you? Because I do have a resolution moved and seconded for this particular resolution, that's all.
Except that even this particular resolution approves an adjusted draft budget annual business plan blah, blah, for public consultation, which means just this rating thing is different, but everything else is the same. And I've got a few questions about the entire paper, 25 pages of plan. So I'm not willing to approve this yet unless I got all these questions asked.
This motion here is not going to affect your questions about the business plan itself, is it?
But it says that council approve an adjusted draft annual business plan, but that for public consultation.
Okay.
We're just talking about the adjustment, but the rest still stays the same. So there's heaps of questions, in my opinion, about the rest of the plan that I couldn't ask in an audit committee sort of meeting, because the audit committee meeting has a different sort of framework. We're talking about sustainability and this and stuff, but not actual what these things stand for and what it is. So I just wonder if I can do that before we move on with the.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I think you're quite right. We'll suspend this for the moment. I've got a mover and a seconder for this here, but I think Councillor Simon's correct in we should be looking at the entire business plan, because that motion there says that this plan goes out for public consultation. You're correct. So I'll accept your questions.
Right, so first, just a very simple one. On page 10, there's a little table called financial ratios, and that just seems to be a typo that we probably want to change. This sort of the last column, it says, it's on page 10. It says it repeats the year 2022, 2023 twice. So I don't know, that's probably just a typo that needs to be changed. Then there's on page, on page 23, there is some numbers that I just can't, that I would love to know what that is. So there's in the row, there's a forecast expenditure for in the proposed budget for the next financial years there's a Roseworthy Township expansion expenditure of $147,000. I just wonder what that is.
On page 23,
Yeah, on page 23, on the statement of comprehensive income, there's on the operating expenses, there's a line called Roseworthy Township expansion, and for the next financial
thanks,
year.
councillor Simon. Nigel?
Councillor, for the Roseworthy expansion, there's another growth model. And what the growth model does is forecast the number of residences that are going to be built over many years. At the same time, it forecasts what expenditure will be incurred by us to maintain the new subdivision. So as soon as the developer moves out, we have to go and cut the grass, etc. So the 147,000 is exactly what the model currently shows as forecast for this year. Whether it actually comes to that or whether the current grass cutting people deal with it without any extra people will need to be seen, but I'm sure there'll be some requirement for spending.
Thanks, Nigel. Further questions?
Yes, please, and thanks for that. On page 25, there's a table called Income Statement General Fund. It says Scenario 1, first draft inclusive of BONIP 2. And there's a line on the operating surplus and deficit. And then it says the current year, year 1, 2, 3, and 4. But then it says underneath, it says net impact of BONIP 2. So then it says in the current year, we got 6 more weeks in the current year. There's an expenditure of, or an impact of $650,000. I just wondered what that will be in such a short time still. But how can in this current year the impact of BONIP 2 be $650,000 since we just approved it within a couple of weeks? So what's that money?
On page 25.
Yes, correct. On page 25 of our plan, there's a table called Income Statement General Fund. And so there's income, expenses, and then operating surplus deficit. It says underneath there, it says net impact of BONIP 2. And in this financial year, then it's a negative net impact of $657,000 due to BONIP 2, which I thought we just approved. So I don't know how we could have spent $657,000 so quickly, or will be spending in the next 6 weeks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Colin.
Through the chair, so it's probably on the high side, that projection, given we're only just kicking off the project now. But certainly, yeah, we are expecting to spend money this financial year. So it may not be 657,000, but it will be, a portion of that for sure.
So in the next 6 weeks, so we haven't spent any of it, but in the next 6 weeks before July 1st, we will be spending that much money.
Sorry, can you repeat that again, please?
So we only got about 6 more weeks left of this financial year. So within these 6 weeks, we'll be able to spend $650,000.
Correct.
So how do we do that?
Yeah, so we kick off with design services with design and construct contractors, I suppose. So they'll be spending a significant amount of time on design and pre-construction services, putting documents out for tender and those sorts of things.
Thanks, Colin. Anything further, Councillor Simon?
Yes, for sure. One thing is actually, since we're that close by, on page 26 is our business cases. So there's the first one was the electric vehicle, which I'm glad to see in there for $61,000 as a trial. But I sort of remember as we were discussing that a while ago, I think specifically Councillor Peter mentioned that shouldn't we be retiring a car instead of, we get a new car, but that should mean that we don't need another car. Is that still part of it, or are we just going to have an extra car?
Question.
Through the chair, I believe that's the additional cost, the difference between the existing type of motor vehicle and an electric vehicle. So it is more expensive. I don't know about the 61, but they'd be. We weren't thinking of having an additional car. It's a replacement. It's just more expensive.
Thanks for that. Yeah, so that clarifies that. But then further down, there's light country signs. We'd be spending roughly $280,000, and from what I understand is we're retiring the existing signage that we have already in our towns. Is that correct?
Yeah, through the chair. So that business case involves 41 existing signs. So the signs that are at the township boundaries, I think there's 22 of those, and there's 19 signs that welcome to a township. So that'd be replaced with, I guess, better quality signs on light country branding. There's also a few other signs that were picked up in the tourism signage audit, mainly in the townships of Freeling, Kapunda and Greenock at key decision points, which we're looking to consolidate. Probably one of the better examples, a couple of good examples in Kapunda along Main Street at intersection of Perry Road and Hancock Road, and also Hill Street, where there's just a plethora of signs that have been built up over time, and we're seeking to replace that with a single sign on light country brand that I guess consolidates all the existing signs into sort of a single nice looking sign. So there's several of those at decision points in key townships that are also in that mix of signs.
Thanks, Kyron.
I've got a few more, so be patient.
I'm just mindful that some of the other councillors might have questions too, that's all.
Oh, sure.
Okay. Go for it.
Right, so then there's a couple of lines down. There's sustainability strategy, and it just puts in that $60,000. Again, in the recommendation that report actually puts forward, there's one thing came out quite clearly, is that we have a lovely report, which is awesome, and you know it's a good report. However, if we don't fund it, it's just entirely useless. So the value of this report or the show of that we're actually serious about this report is how much money we put behind it. So $60,000 as a one-off doesn't really cut that, in my opinion. So especially it's only year one, so year two and year three and year four, we're not spending any money anymore on the sustainability plan. I mean, that would be quite a waste of a very good plan. On top of that, because I had a few more business cases that were more than $60,000. One was the model house at Rosebery that we all, as I remember, everyone here was quite happy about doing that, and other business cases about increasing money for planting, council reserves and that sort of stuff. And that would have been substantially more than $60,000. And I just wondered why this got cut to like a low figure, in my opinion. Plus, why is it not an ongoing cost? Because if you do it once, that's not good. That's not sustainable.
Well, I can't answer that question. I don't know.
Mayor Bill, I'm happy to, Richard Dodson here, happy to answer that question. I think that when we put the $60,000 for that strategy in place, it was probably put in as a bit of an ambit number without knowing the full extent of what would be included in the final sustainability document. I would expect that $60,000 will be seed money to further develop the business cases for years 2, 3, 4, up to 10, 25, 30 years and beyond. So I certainly don't expect that this to be the only sustainability money allocated. I would expect there'll be a changed focus once that document is finalised and all the public consultation is completed. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. You happy with that, Councillor Simon?
I didn't 100% understand. If we budget $60,000 for it now, how is that going to change?
Well, as Richard said, that was to implement things that are brought up over the next 3 years from the strategy committee, or from the sustainability committee, pardon me. So there's a war chest there for things that will be raised, no doubt, at strategy. Councillor Dean.
Well, if I understood Richard correctly, what he said was that in future years, business cases can be put up,
That's right.
which would respond to things in the plan. So therefore, the amount of expenditure could be in excess of the 60,000 in years 2, 3 and 4 of the 4-year plan, 4-year budget. Is that correct, Richard? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Dean. Yes, that is correct. I think because there were just probably some unknowns when we embarked on the strategy to start with. As I say, I think the $60,000 was probably more, as I say, an ambit amount to put in with a little bit of unknown. But I think it allows us over the next 12 months to develop up further business cases that we will put up as brand new business cases, and hopefully develop a program of work similar to what we do with our roads or other assets that we have, that we will actually have a properly funded sustainability plan over the coming years, and over the next year is what we will do, is develop that plan.
Thank you, Richard. Councillor Simon.
Yes, thanks. I got some more questions. So in the annual business plan, actually in the report, so I'm reading the report that we got for the audit and risk committee, but in that report, and this is the page, I think it's page 12 of the report, it talks about Grover's Way. I'm just going to try to think. And what it says is council's commitment to this project is only the purchase of relevant land to encourage private sector development. Now, to me, I mean, that's obviously a publicly available document. So to me, I think we've done a lot more than that. So I just wondered, I mean, I'm going to put a motion without notice at the end of this meeting, but I'm just wondering, it is not true that we only spent, that the only commitment is the purchase of land, because we've obviously spent a lot of money on lawyers and on architects and on consultants and so there's a lot of other commitment. Plus, there's obviously a lot of commitment in council employees' time and CEO's time and all this sort of stuff. So just this sentence in this document that's there for the public to see says, council's commitment to this project is only the purchase of relevant lands to encourage private sector development. I just wonder how this can be true.
Mayor Bill, if I could just say, in other places where I've seen that written, and this should be some additional words there, and facilitation should have been added, because council's responsibility, and this has been said repeatedly in other, this forum, in other meeting, that our responsibility is land assembly and facilitation. So when you're talking about facilitation and those words, you're right, that should be in there, because not having them in there is only telling half the story. So I think that's a good point.
Yep, they can be, they'll certainly be added, facilitation.
I mean, the issues, excuse me if I may say, but the issue is that this is something that's not in our annual business plan. This is in the report that went to the audit committee and to this council meeting, that these words are in them, saying like that it doesn't make any difference anymore if we now change, like retrospectively, change the agenda of this meeting. I'm questioning, why is this being put there like this in the first place? You know what I mean? Like,
Well, you've answered the question. You've asked
Sorry.
To,
Sorry, Mayor Bill, can I just interject there? I think it is important that item actually comes under strategic initiatives loans. And I believe it was looking at the loan borrowings that would occur for those strategic initiatives. And I think it was trying to highlight that there wasn't going to be any loan purchase or loans for that, but I think there is still going to be the involvement of staff to progress and, as was said, facilitate the activation of that land that has been purchased.
Richard, you're happy then if we add the facilitation aspect to that comment that's in the business plan?
I think by doing that, that certainly helps clarify what council's involvement is, because I think that probably the actions and words of staff have I think consistently been around facilitation, but I think that has certainly been missed out in that item 2 point that's been raised.
Yep. All right, we'll ensure that's an addition to the when it goes to public consultation. Councillor Peter?
But regarding the the Droves encounter, the press, the local press, had a front page article with jubilation about the expenditure of $25.6 million. Now, I don't see where that ties in with what Councillor Zeller's been saying. Is there any explanation?
Well, I think
Not our money.
it's not our money. If you read the article, it sort of says that.
Well, what about the construction of the site, the arena, and everything that goes with it? It's on council land, and presumably council would be paying for it.
No, it's a ground lease only, I understand, and the investors will do all of that. And if we get them, if we don't get them, it won't happen.
Just on this particular project, I see we're looking to get $6 or $8 million contribution from the federal government. With a scenario, we end up with a Liberal member locally, Tony Passon, who I believe is a brilliant member for us. But if we end up with a Labor government, what's the chances of us getting $8 million out of a Labor government?
Can I make a comment about that? One of the things that Kyra might want to support, one of the things that if there's a scheme like a Building Better Regions or whatever, there are very carefully defined criteria, and these days, because everything in some sense is marginal because of the volatility of the electorate, that generally the applications are assessed on merit according to the criteria. And therefore, with a Liberal Labor government, normal course event shouldn't make any difference. Of course, excluding the pork barreling that occurs at election time, which won't be for another 3 years after next week or so. And therefore, I think we probably, whilst it could be a risk, I don't think it's a very high one because of the, that was explained to me, and I think Colin was there at the time, by a person who was involved in that sort of assessment at federal level. So I don't think that's going to be a significant concern.
Most of those applications are assessed by Infrastructure Australia, which is an independent body. In fact, Rod Hook is a member of Infrastructure Australia board. Byron?
Yeah, I guess through the chair. So there's grant funding programs that both state and federal governments typically put out in rounds. There's eligibility criteria and merit criteria that applicants need to meet. And quite rightfully, I think Councillor Dean has stated that goes through, I guess, an evaluation process by, I guess, officers of state and federal government. And then those recommendations are put forward to ministers for decisions. So that's one element of the project process. Supposedly, there's no sort of political lens that's put over that process, but I won't comment anymore. And there's projects of this particularly this type of nature in regional areas also can follow a different path, and that path is, I guess, through an advocation type role that councils, particularly if they've got a private partner on board, can basically pitch their project to governments to secure grant funding, and it sort of just gets allocated from a high level funding program. So it's not through a competitive grant application process. We think that this particular process would suit that type of process or interface with government, given the significant support that we've received from particularly state government and the SA Tourism Commission. So that's certainly something we'll be looking at in the coming months.
Thanks, Colin. Further questions?
Please. There's in the actual plan itself, there's a significant influences and priorities sort of page. That's page 18 of the draft plan that's going to go out for public consultation. There's one line in there that I'm sort of unhappy. I just want to question anyway. It says new capital projects may be funded, and it does say via a combination of other things, but amongst those things are rate increases. So I'm just wondering, since most of these, the most recent big capital projects that we have engaged in, or this council has engaged in or approved, they were all not driven by like a public. By the public, it wasn't public consultation. What do you want? Oh, we want this, we do this. It's all been stuff that came out from the council itself, which obviously strategic land, Bunny 1 and 2, Drovers Way, all this sort of stuff. So to then go out and say that we're going to concoct up these big projects, and if you don't have enough money, we're going to raise your rates for that, I find that a bit, well, I can't really swallow that. So in other words, if we would be open and transparent with the public and ask them what they want, and then sit and they go like, oh, we want this beautiful stadium, and then we go like, well, we're going to have to raise your rates for that, and they go like, yeah, we want the stadium, we'll raise our rates. Well, that's a good thing, but the other way around, just going to say here that all new capital projects may be funded via rate increases, I find that a bit hard to swallow for the public that's going to get rate increases anyway, but by the valuation increases, without them even knowing what these capital projects are. So I just wonder why that line is in there, and I'm not really happy with it.
Oh, well, I can't answer that either. I think these projects are driven by the community, I would think.
Excuse me, how are they driven by the community? We're all in confidence. People don't even know that there's a Bunny 2. People, like the whole Drovers Way, we done it all in confidence. Like strategic land purchases driven by the community. Are you kidding me? Seriously? They don't even know about it. How could they be driven by the community? It's definitely not driven by the community. I mean, that is guaranteed. But that's besides the point. The point is that it says in here, in the document that we are going to give to the community, it says that new capital projects may be funded via rate increases. And if somebody actually takes the time and reads everything, they'll be like, what? I don't want to have rate increases for new capital projects that I don't even know about. So that line there, I find problematic.
Did you have a question? Oh, sorry. Councillor David.
I've just got one further question on this. If we look at this scenario and we say, right, federal government funding is not available for them, we've got to raise the way escalation is going for materials and labour, it's going to be over 30 million bucks. When do we draw the line if we don't get the $30 million from out there in the private sector? Or do we just keep on spending in-house saying, oh, we've employed a consultant to look at da-da-da, and we're just saying we're going to spend $650,000 in 6 weeks. What are the 3 major items that we're going to spend 650 grand on? Can you list the 3 major items?
I thought Corinne did. You mentioned that earlier.
No.
Was that the
Well,
Roseworthy
I
one?
must have missed it. What 1, 2, 3 are the three major items?
So I guess the budget projects are a little bit different to standard projects. The
Right,
fact that it essentially is loaning money to Bunyip Water. So what they
Right,
do is they give us the forecast
Yep.
of what their expenses are for the coming months, and
Yep.
then council lends that money,
Mhm.
and then Bunyip essentially spends the money. So that is I guess it's an upfront drawdown on the loan. Yeah, and so then they then go out and engage consultants and contractors to
Yep.
finish off the design, and commence the construction.
So all this spending you're talking about, 650 clicks, is all related to Bunyip Water.
So I guess in response to the earlier question about that 657 in 2021-22 in the operating statement, that is correct.
Right. Okay, thank you.
June, I'd like to say something.
Through the chair, I just wanted to respond to Councillor Simon, the last question about the line on new capital projects may be funded in the assumptions, and we're happy to take that line out. Oh, we're happy to remove that statement from the plan.
Further questions, councillors?
Yes,
Councillor
please. I actually don't know where I found that now, but it somewhere says employee cost is only the operating component of salaries and wages, including superannuations and leave loading and all that sort of stuff, and insurances, where staff work on capital projects, full cost of their time is allocated to these projects. So how does this work? I mean, that confuses me, because then I'm thinking if the 9 million or 10 million that we're going to budget for employee cost is not the actual employee cost then. So the actual employee cost is that budgeted number plus some, for us, undefined number that's going to come out of the capital expenditure.
Through the chair, that is the total employee costs, and then it will be the capital. For people who work on capital projects, their wages will be then attributed to the capital projects through our payroll system and general ledger coding. So that'll come out.
So it's not additional expenditure.
Nigel will help you as well.
Councillor, in terms of the long-established local government accounting format principles, there is a distinction always made between a category called employee costs and salaries and wages and the other costs of employing people. And it's predominantly done like that to allow for that capitalisation of cost. So there will be, for instance, a crew of staff and associated equipment that are heavily involved in construction. When we pay those people, we pay for the machinery. We pay for the people. It'll be shown as salaries and wages. But what happens is that we work out what the cost of each one of those people is in total terms: workers' comp insurance, superannuation, supervision, everything. We work out a rate, and when they work on a capital project, that time gets charged to the capital project. So it's no longer operating. It's charged to capital and becomes part of the capital asset that we're booking. And when that accounting happens, there's a credit that goes back to employee costs. So if you want to understand what we're spending total on salaries and wages in the organisation, you won't get it by looking at employee costs, because that will vary each year depending on how much work is being done on capital projects. And in recent years, this organisation has done a lot. I understand we've actually built a particular crew that specialises on that, but Richard might like to elaborate on that more.
Richard, did you,
Yes, no, thank you. Yeah, look, that's exactly right, Nigel. I think in total, including our project managers, I think organisationally, we've probably got about 10% of our staff involved in capital projects, and that can be the resheeting of the unsealed roads or the building of the East Terrace project that's just recently opened. So it is equally a sense of frustration at times amongst our staff in terms of capturing that information, but nonetheless, we're very aware that any growth in our group, we always make sure is in the construction area, so it doesn't actually increase the overall employee costs that appear in the operating statements. I hope that's helped.
thanks, Richard. Just one thing, Councillor Simon, too, in relation to community-driven projects. The farm centre at Freeling is a classic example that was community-driven and organised by the council, of course, but the community drove that project. And there are many others, I just can't think off the top of my head.
I mean, that was out of my, not in the last 4 years, because that happened before I was around. So from what I can see from my perspective, there wasn't any. So the ones that I'm...
Well, there's been a number. Town Square is another one, you know, the Town Square here in Kapunda. I just can't think of all of them off the top of my head, but there are many. We don't think of everything. The community think a lot of it. And we bring it to the table here as elected members. That's our job. Do you have another question, Councillor?
I do have, I mean, this is actually much more general question, which I would, if I can direct it to Nigel directly. It's something that, I mean, I have been explained by your predecessor, and I think I understand it, but I know that the average punter, and I include myself in an average punter when it comes to accounting, still doesn't understand. If I look at the expenses and the income, I see income is obviously money coming in, as in rates and just a little bit other stuff, and expenses obviously money going out. There's always in these pictures there's depreciation as quite a big chunk. So as I said, as a total novice, I don't know nothing about accounting. I'm thinking to myself, depreciation is the wear down of assets, or like of capital assets like roads and bridges and whatever. That is not, in my simple mind, that's not a money going out the door. That's just these assets deteriorating, right? So what's the number of the 6.3 million going out the door? Because we minusing one of the other and then coming up with a budget out of that. So to me, that's totally illogical. I mean, like I said, I had it explained by your predecessor, and I thought I understood it, but I just love to ask it again and see if you can
Make a different answer.
Mayor Bill, if I can just make a comment on that. I had a lot of trouble understanding that, and I actually run this past John Comrie, and he agreed that it was more or less correct. And that is that if you look at the annual depreciation as the amount you need to spend on average to renew your assets. So therefore you should be looking at how much you spend on asset renewal and all those things that do maintain your assets in as new condition. And those numbers over time should be roughly equal. But year to year, they can vary quite considerably because the asset management plan more might be 1 year than the other, and you can swap things around a bit. But by and large, it's a different sort of concept to write off for taxation like it is in a business. But for us, depreciation is an operating expense because that's actually what we need to spend to keep our assets in as new condition on average.
Thanks, Councillor Dean. You happy with that, or would you like Dean, like Nigel, to have a second go?
Councillor Dean's exactly correct. I just wanted to highlight, I put the slide back up on the screen to summarise the depreciation for the next 10 years and the spend for the next 10 years. So the first column on the screen, 22-23, we're looking at about 6.3 million in depreciation forecast in the plan. If you go down to what we're spending on, we're actually spending 10.869 million next year. But if you look across, exactly as Councillor Dean has said, the program goes up and down depending on when the assets are expired and we have to replace them. And out over that 10 years, we're expected to spend around about 8 million in terms of annual renewal of assets on average. And as I said earlier in the night, that actually makes up for some catch up where we were spending in years gone by less than depreciation. So assets are worn out that need to be replaced quicker than expected. Now, the other question you should ask is, well, if we're spending, if there's 6 million in depreciation, why are we spending 10 million next year? And that's mainly because of the one unusual CWMS project, which is going to be over $3 million in one hit. So that pushes up this year, but there won't be any spend in terms of that particular asset for many years. Hope that makes sense.
Excuse me, it still does not make any sense. Oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry, it's through the chair. So your depreciation on your buildings, your institutes and all those buildings, how does that fluctuate? I mean, they're still standing there, it's still perfectly all right, and yet there's depreciation on them. What causes that to fluctuate? That might help you a bit.
Well, buildings is one of those, it's relatively consistent. It's pretty much increasing in a line. It's mainly due to the purchase of new assets, and buildings are very long life assets. So the depreciation rate for additional buildings is relatively small. So you don't actually see a big increase in terms of those sorts of assets. Probably the piece that I didn't add to the explanation before that is vital is that depreciation goes to the operating statement. The expenditure on assets goes to the balance sheet. So you don't actually see the spend on assets through the operating statements. You see the depreciation charge. You really need to go and look at two other pieces, and that is you look at the balance sheet and you look at the line that's got infrastructure assets and property, and you'll see that increases by the amount that we spend next year. But if you want to have a look at a direct number, have a look at the cash flow statement. Cash flow statement, investment in new assets, that will be equal to that 10 something million, because that's the cash going out the door.
So through the can I just ask another one? So the repairs that were done to the Freeling Library and new guttering put on because that was all buggered, and so I just wonder, how does that affect the depreciation? Because that's a renewal, isn't it? And so that gets added in. It's hard to understand.
It is. Councillor, we could probably talk about the complexities of that subject for a week.
Oh.
But if first of all you have to decide when you spend money on something like an asset, does it extend its useful life? If it's just minor changes, well, it's probably not going to change the capital. Right. It's probably just going to be expense as maintenance. But if it's a significant amount and it extends the life of the asset, then we'll add it to the capital. If we add it to the capital, the model says, okay, how long is this going to last? I'm going to add a bit more to depreciation.
The guttering would come into that because that adds value to the building. Probably. Councillor Simon, you have one more? Oh, Councillor Peck.
Regarding this depreciation discussion, if we took, say, the Freeling Institute and the Kapunda Institute, buildings which have been standing for over a century, should we be charging ourselves depreciation on them? Or should they be taken off the depreciation schedule and placed on a repair and maintenance basis?
It's an accounting treatment, yes. Nigel?
I did warn that this could take a long time talking about this subject, but in the 1990s, someone developed an accounting standard to say this is what has to happen. And effectively, the core part of that is that we have to revalue assets. And when we revalue the assets at its current value, it actually changes the depreciation. The reason they did that was that in decades before that, the assets were showing at what they cost and there was large inflation. And what was happening was the councils were getting well behind what they should have been spending because they were looking at a historic depreciation amounts. And that's why their assets were getting into trouble. And possibly around here might be part of that as well. So the whole idea was to change the accounting methodology to ensure that you were getting information that said, this is what the current value of these assets are, and this is what the current depreciation is, so that when you go to replace them, it's going to be something like around what the depreciation is. It makes you set aside money to have enough funds to replace the assets that you've got invested in.
Was that the AA 27?
Yeah.
Okay.
So Councillor Lynette will now know everything else because she knows AAS 27. So that's exactly right.
Was it double A or triple A?
That was in
AAS 27.
Yeah.
Councillor David?
Just a question on major projects, and I'll name a project, the Anlaby Road project. There was a commitment given, I believe, by people at Anlaby, they were going to contribute $200,000 to that project. We've collected that money?
I can't answer that, I don't know. Does anyone know?
Yeah, through the chair, I can answer that question. Oops, my apologies. The Anlaby Station, as part of the works, entered into a long-term agreement to, well, firstly, they entered into a long-term or into an agreement to contribute, and part of that was actually a long-term agreement to repay the money. So Anlaby Station, there were two components. One was their driveway, of which they fully paid for, and the other one was the road, which is where the $200,000 comes in. So that has now been put into our system, and they will contribute money each quarter to repaying that debt.
Thank you, Richard. Further questions, councillors?
No, bedtime.
No. Actually,
Oh, I do have a motion moved in second. Councillor Simon?
I do have more, one or two more questions. Just noticed. In the appendix, we got a nice list of all the stuff that we're going to be doing, and just, I mean, it's a big list. I didn't go through every single point. However, just starting at the top, so it says Capital Asset Renewal Program for Rural Sealed Road Program, and it says nature of works, all this stuff. So the second line item is Roseworthy Road. It says program spray seal with 300mm cement treated stabilizer. I'm just wondering, as far as I know, Roseworthy Road is just a bituminized or a hot mixed road. So what's a spray seal do on a road like that, and what's 300mm cement treated stabilizer? I mean,
Richard, are you still online?
Yes, certainly still here. Yep, thank you, and happy to respond to that one. So this is the section of Roseworthy Road that will sit between the Tearley Highway and the Sturt Highway, and it goes just past the, I think there's a little chicken farm there on the southern side. So if anyone's driven that section of road, it's in that area of our council that's really got poor soil types, and the road has moved around quite a lot. So we've got all of the rubble that is actually there. So our aim here will be to mix a stabilizer in there to try and strengthen the pavement up and stop it from heaving up and down too much, and then we'll simply spray seal the road at the end of it, which is our normal process there. We probably will look at doing a little bit of asphalt work closer to the intersections where the heavy vehicles will be going very slow or where they're braking. Yeah, this is a heavy vehicle safety productivity program, so council will kick in $150,000, and we're hoping to get $600,000 out of the Australian government through that program. So I hope that helps.
Yeah, thank you, Richard. We've been very successful in that heavy vehicle program to date, so hopefully we can keep that going. Further questions, councillors? No questions? All right, well, we can go back to the
Thank-
original. Councillor Sharon, Councillor Bill, do you have any questions? Sorry.
Just put the motion, Bill.
Okay,
I've got another meeting to go to, so.
sure. We've had a mover and a seconder of the motion there. I can read it out if you'd like me to, but
That includes the bit about the 20% increase, doesn't it?
that's
That one,
correct.
yes.
That
I
will
think
be-
Bill moved that and I seconded that.
Yeah, that's additional to that, the motion will be included in that motion. You happy with that, Councillor David? Right. All right, if there's no further questions or comments in relation to that, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Councillor Bill and Councillor Sharon, you for the motion?
Yes, I put my hand up.
We just couldn't see you, that's all.
Oh, sorry.
No, that's okay. And Councillor Bill?
Yeah, I'm for the motion, Bill.
Thanks very much. Well, the motion's carried, and thank you, everybody. It's a real positive step in the right direction, I'm sure. Okay. Now, the second motion we have here is the possible resolution for public consultation, the rebate that we discussed. Further questions or comments in relation to this, councillors?
I have one, Mayor Bill, and that relates to the 11%. That's something that I think we might need to have further consideration over, depending on the impact.
Yep.
Does that have to be in there, or can we just say that there will be a rebate?
Well, councillors, I think.
I don't know. I'm just asking the question.
Yeah, the more information we can give people, probably the better. But
Yeah, but
Do,
11% might not be the number we end up with. That might be 10%, for example.
no, we might be able to decide that now with a bit of luck. Councillor David?
Couldn't we say up to 11%?
through,
No.
do we need to do that tonight? Because we really don't know exactly what we're going to put up for public consultation yet, do we?
Do, yes.
Well, the business plan we do.
Yeah, it's just the business plan.
gotta be part of it.
Yeah, but that's part of it. But don't we have to decide?
Through the chair, this motion is to go out for public consultation to gain feedback
And then it
on
comes
the
back.
proposal. This doesn't mean this is what you have to agree to. So this is to gain information from the public
Mm.
and to put a position
Mm.
out there and see. People might come back and say, look, I think it should
11
be
too high, might be.
whatever.
Yeah.
That's
But they might not object and it be a reasonable
Okay, that's
consideration.
fair.
Mayor Bill, could we have it possibly set at possibly 11%? Would that work?
Yeah. Possibly, or, yep. That seems to be getting,
Approximately or roughly or?
that seems to be getting general agreement, approximately. Okay, well. Or for example, what words, councillors? Not, for example, might not be a good one, because they could say,
I think proposed is a good one because that's a starting point. You will get feedback.
Proposed, yes, it is proposed at 11%. That would be good.
proposed.
Proposed, yeah, that's a good one.
Yep, proposed. Okay, with that minor change there, and you want to leave it at 11% or you want to do the 10%? Leave it,
With proposed now, I think we leave it 11%, then people can propose a different number if they think it ought to be a different number.
okay. All happy with that, councillors? All right, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Oh, sorry, mover in a second, councillor David. No one like to second that, councillor Dean.
Sorry. We actually left a gap for people's views. And this is the rule about if someone's done a renovation extra, what would be reasonable for the value of the improvement? The neighbouring council used $20,000, which seems relatively small, but this is a subjective question, but it'd be worth as the consultation process and people knowing what that would be.
Perhaps 30 or 40,000, perhaps might be a more reasonable figure where you could do a minor extension or something. Not very much for that, I wouldn't think, Councillor Simon, would there be? So if you made it say 40,000, that would mean that people can do on a variation without being caught up in this excluded from applying for a revaluation or a
$40,000. Greater than 40,000. Councillor Bill, Councillor Sharon, would you be happy with greater than $40,000 on improved?
Yeah, fine, Bill. All
The
good.
next down is the rebate is unavailable property sold since the last evaluation. Seems reasonable and fair. Happy with that one? And the next one is rebate is unavailable property where the land use has changed, i.e. From primary to residential. Happy with that? Okay, well, I can put that motion. Have a mover. Well, it's been moved and seconded, the whole of it. Okay. All those in favour? Those against? Bill and Sharon, you can hear? You okay?
Yeah.
Sharon?
Yeah,
Thanks, Councillor Sharon. All the motions carried. Thank you, councillors. Now, I think we're okay with all of that. On the agenda now. On to recommendations from the committees. We need to go back to section 4 of our agenda, which is the Audit and Risk Committee. And I think, if I recall, we had the motion, one section of that to be withdrawn.
Mayor Bill, I think that effectively the first of the motions we passed replaces that.
It does. That's
So therefore, we don't need to do any more of that. Is that correct? We
yeah,
essentially now replaced it with a different motion.
that's right. That's why I misled you to start with, because I thought that's what we were going to do. And, I preempted and I shouldn't have.
It's all right. It was all done correctly now, I think, anyway.
Well, I can put the recommendation there that the agenda and reports of the minutes of the meeting of the Light Regional Council Audit and Risk Committee meeting held Tuesday the 10th of May be received and as listed below be adopted. Thanks, Councillor Simon and Councillor David. What was it?
Yes, the agenda. That's all.
Oh, okay. All right. We're done. So we move on now to our next meeting, and our next meeting is our normal ordinary meeting of council, which is on the next Tuesday.
Just a
24th.
question. Did we actually receive that?
Yeah.
Yeah, we did before. Sorry, I might forgot.
I'll just say that was moved. That the agenda for our regional meeting held 10th May be this.
Yeah. And then we talked about withdrawing it.
That's right.
Council then wanted it withdrawn. Yeah. All right, councillors, so I can officially close the meeting.
No. Can I, before you close the meeting, please, before I sort of know that I'd love to move a motion without notice, another question, I can't see that heading in this.
No, it wasn't in there, but I'm happy to take it.
Okay, this, just before when we were talking about the Drovers, well, I don't even know what it's called anymore, if it's Kidman Experience or Drovers Encounter or Drovers Way, but whatever that project, we had a fair bit of discussion about the business plan, and I totally understand the explanation that we can't produce a business plan about a thing that we don't know who's going to take it on, how it's all going to work. But as far as I understand, the question wasn't really about that. I think the question was about the business plan, in my opinion. Correct me if I'm wrong, Councillor David, but my impression was that the question was about what's our plan of our involvement and how much are we going to spend just for our bit of the big thing. Not having a plan for the whole thing, that's impossible for us to do, but having a proper plan for what we're going to do. Now, since we're already at the end of this, that whole planning thing is a bit futile now, but what I would like to know is what it costs at this point in time. Yeah, so I do have a motion here which says the council receives as soon as practical a detailed summary of all costs incurred up to date by the project, and I put it in little thingies, Kidman Experience, Drovers Encounter, Drovers Way, from its inception, because it's gone back a few years now. The above summary, which is to include all in-kind contributions and costs for council employee hours and all costs for external contractors such as consultants, lawyers, architects, advisors, and the like. Because again, just to come back to that sentence saying that we are just providing the land, which we are, but we've provided considerably more than just the land in labor and in architects and all this other costs. And at this point, none of us knows what that cost is. And I find it quite strange. I mean, I find it a bit strange that we embarked on something without even knowing what the cost is going to be. But now, since it's sort of quite close to the end of our cost, I'd love to know what that was. So this would be the motion.
So I know where you're coming from, but like a lot of projects, we don't break them down to the levels of how many bobby pins we've bought. The major road we just built on the bypass, for example. Yeah. We know we wanted to do it. We know the basic cost of the project. Of course. But to break it down to hours and minutes of people that worked on it, that's difficult.
I think you misunderstand my question entirely. I don't want any breakdowns whatsoever. I want one number. $1 dollar.
Number of hours.
No. I said I need the number, a summary of what that all is together. Because I don't know. I know that we spent how much money we spent on this property, this property, this property, and this property. I know this exactly, but I do not know how much. And there'd be considerable hours that Kieran would have worked. There's considerable money in Wood Beckett's drafting and proposal that these people came up, they got down. There's lawyers. There's all that. That would be that the land is probably less than half of the cost that we've already expended over 2 years in employee hours, in consultants, in drafts people, in engineers, in visiting all, like even the CEO's hour. An hour of our CEO costs $150. 1 hour him being on the phone with someone is $150. Specifically, since I heard before that employee hours are divvied out by, or this hour goes to this guy, this hour goes to this project. In my opinion, this should be one press of the button, and you guys should know exactly how much you spent on this project. I would really love to know that, because I find it strange that I have to ask it in afterwards, because usually, as you mentioned with the roads, beforehand we know 600,000 for the road, and they built the road. Oh, well, we're so good, we only spent 550. Great, but this is the opposite way around. We have no idea what we're going to spend. Just give them a free ticket, spend whatever, and in the end, we don't even know how much they spent. I'd love to know, and I think we're entitled to know, just for transparency. I have nothing against it. I think it's a great project. No worries. However, I think it's super important for us to know exactly how much that costs.
You've made your point. So we'll take that motion on notice, or I think Kyron might have something to say.
Mayor Bill, I think personally that a motion like that might need to be taken on notice for as a notice of motion. But I just want to make a point that whilst it's fair and reasonable to ask for actual costs like costs and so on, as part of this, like the cost of producing the concept plan and that kind of thing, to try and get that down to the actual hours spent by employees on this is actually isn't a simple task, nor is it one that should be done, because a lot of this kind of activity would, for example, be a legitimate work of responsibility of the Economic Development Department, which is actually established to, in fact, promote projects that increase the economic activity of the area. And so I'd definitely be opposed to that being included in it. The other information I think is legitimate, but I don't think that is. But I think in order for this to be considered properly, I certainly don't feel confident to vote on that tonight, because for a start I didn't actually understand that. Due to my hearing problem, 3/4 of what Simon said. So if it's in writing, then I can think about it. So I would suggest to you, Mayor, in your capacity as Mayor, to take it as a notice on motion for the next meeting. That's my personal request.
Thanks, Councillor Dean. Did you want to say anything, Colin?
Thanks through the chair. So I guess exactly what you're asking for has been reported to council. I can't remember the exact meeting. It was probably mid to late last
See you
year.
later, all. Going.
But it was reported in confidence, because there's some sensitive information there that is still considered in confidence. But we are currently reviewing those reports that we can release from confidence to the public. But I mean, obviously you guys have access to the confidential reports, so I encourage you to go back through those reports and have a look. But yeah, we're looking to bring a report to council to release much of those project reports as soon as possible.
Thanks, Colin. That's good news. Yep. Because I can understand what you're saying, but the information is there, but we just need to distill it into one space. So perhaps if we have a look through some of the confidential sections where we've discussed this, some of those numbers and those questions can be answered, and perhaps we, Warren, if I could be so bold as to maybe if you could for the next meeting have a little précis of something there of even when the matters were discussed, the dates, to give us a bit of background.
Mayor Bill, that report is actually on the 27th July 2021, item 15.6, Drovers Encounter Project Update, Costs and Benefits. So it's in the confidential agenda of the 27th July 2021 council meeting, item 15.6. So if you look at that, that should have that information.
Well, with all due respect, I do remember the report, and it does not have all that information. So,
You happy to have a look at that particular?
I distinctly remember the report, and I will have a look at it obviously again. But I think there's still a lot of information missing that I would like to see. And I think we're entitled to know that, especially the public.
Well, let's see what's in that confidential thing first, shall we? Because that might answer most of your questions. Councillor Dave, do you have something to say?
I just recall that time, I remember moving, asking for a report and asking for a business plan for that particular project. When it was called back then the Kidman, whatever. We've since morphed a couple of times from there, and we were promised that we were going to get the business plan presented in the third term.
The business plan.
Yes, I think we were. If you check the minutes,
Strategic
what
plan.
we were told that we'd get it in the third quarter of last year.
That was a
which we never
strategic
got.
plan, and Brian has been over this
business
countless
plan.
times.
I have requested a business plan.
Well,
being
he's
produced to council.
obviously got it wrong, because he's been over it, sitting right beside me telling us.
Well,
that
I'll
was a
check my
strategic
records
plan.
at home.
We can't produce a business plan if we don't know what business is going to be there. How can you?
Well, how can you put any boundaries on when you stop spending on something when you haven't got the capital to do it?
But anyone who's going to put the business plan together is going to spend that money, not us.
Yeah, but we're still spending along the way, and the tap just
Well,
keeps on running with it, and we don't seem
Only
to
to
get the
promote the
point.
fact that we want to encourage investors. of
Okay,
course
so
we've got to
what
spend
you're
money.
saying is that's just an open check and we could run that up to
No,
10
no, I
million.
think what Kyron has
We could run that up
pointed
to
out
5
there,
to
there's a
10
budget
million,
lines for those things.
but we haven't seen them.
Well, you will. And that's as simple as that.
And I think at that time, we were told there was commercial incompetence matters that were being dealt with by private investors. Well, if we're supposed to be the board of a company, aren't we entitled to know what those figures are? How are we supposed to make a decision on things if we don't know the details?
You provide some background.
Some thoughts. Yeah, at the previous council meeting, I think this question was asked in relation to a business plan. And the business plan is usually put up by the person who is the owner of the business, and council won't be in relation to the actual project. So I think there's two matters here. And the other one is, I think has already been put forward in the motion that was tabled by Councillor Simon regarding expenses. So there are two separate matters and they'll be looked at. Well, the business plan won't be presented because once again, it's for a private investor, but the motion can be dealt with separately. I think they're the points at hand. And in the meantime, some information about historical data on expenditure as well that elected members can look at while they're waiting.
Thank you, June.
And we don't have quorum anymore.
No, that will be followed up, Councillor Simon. I think that you've made a good point there, and we probably just need some refreshing of our memory as well, because I can't quite recall the detail either. So no, that's fair enough. We'll do that. Councillors, we're out of a quorum, and so
Oh, still, sorry, Sharon's still online.
Oh, we're okay.
So sorry.
Yeah, I'm still here.
Oh, Karen.
Sharon, yep.
All right. Well, was there any further comments, councillors, or anything? No. Otherwise, we'll close the meeting. And thank you very much for quite a robust meeting. And certainly now it's going to be interesting to get our business plan and details out to the public for consultation, and we'll see what happens from there. Thank you, councillors, for your time.